What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going game by game, talking about the players I'd be starting and sitting this week. We have 12 games to get through, meaning this is going to be a long one, so buckle up. As always, if I don't answer your specific start-sit question, maybe it's really close, you can always see my exact projections and rankings at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So, with that, we get things started off as usual. The stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which skill player scored the most fantasy points during the Thanksgiving games last year? The answer is Antonio Gibson against the Cowboys. Jacob Wallen was first to get that right on YouTube, and at Aaron J. Powell was first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat, same exact thing, but this year. What skill player scored the most half PPR points? It was close depending on the scoring format. So half PPR points on Thanksgiving this season. All right, let's do this. So, first game up, we've got an epic matchup between the Jets and the Texans. This game has a relatively average, but slightly lower than average, 44.5 point total, and the Texans are 2.5 point home favorites. For the Jets, there are 0 must plays on this side, which is not typical in a game against the Texans, but such is life for the New York Jets football team. The only viable players I'm seeing here are Elijah Moore and Corey Davis, and then Ty Johnson and Tevin Coleman. You're not starting Zach Wilson. Crowder, maybe in like a deeper format, but I would probably just stick to the 4 I mentioned before. Elijah Moore can be played at wide receiver 2, can be played in the flex. He is my favorite play from that side, while Corey Davis is more of a flex play. For me, I don't know that I'd feel comfortable playing Corey Davis in my wide receiver 2 spot unless I am in a 16-team league. Anything else, I probably want someone better. Again, Zach Wilson's going to be the quarterback, and that's been a downgrade so far this season, not only for the pass catchers and especially for Elijah Moore. I mean, you look at any game that Wilson was a quarterback versus any game that he wasn't the quarterback, he's gone off. Elijah Moore's gone off in any game that Zach Wilson was not the quarterback in, and he's been awful in every game that Zach Wilson was the quarterback. Is that going to continue? I don't think so. I think that they're using him more. He himself has progressed as a player, and so I don't think that's going to happen. He's still my favorite play. But the main issue is for the running backs, right? Wilson wasn't targeting the running backs, and all the backups were. So it's definitely more risk on all of these players now that Zach Wilson is going to be the quarterback this week. But it's not like they were fantastic plays to start with. So I would prefer to not play any Jets running back, but Johnson and Coleman are both fine as low-end 2s, preferably not, definitely not in 8-team leagues, definitely not in 10-team leagues. In 12-team leagues, it starts to be okay, but it's more preferable in 14, 16-team leagues. But if you're in a 10-team league and you're starting Ty Johnson or Tevin Coleman, you better have a lot of injuries, right? Because they're not very strong plays, especially with Wilson being quarterback now. But yeah, I think that kind of covers it for the Jets side. You're not playing Wilson. You're not playing tight ends. I don't think you're playing Crowder that much. My main interest is more a little bit on Davis and a little bit on the running backs, but not that much, even in a good matchup. For the Texans, this is also a fantastic matchup, right? This is not a good Jets defense. But the only viable plays are really Tyrod Taylor and Brandon Cooks. Maybe David Johnson or Burkhead in deeper formats, but I still don't trust them in 8 or 10-team leagues, and I really would prefer not to go there in a 12-team league. Cooks is, I would say, a must-play. I don't really care how big your format is or who you have. He's probably a must-play. And Tyrod's going to be a popular streaming option this week. He is not immune to failing, so even though this is a good spot, think about what happens if Houston gets up. And what if Houston gets up on the back of a pick 6 or a rushing touchdown, right? He performed well last week on no passing touchdowns, barely any passing yards because they ran the ball a lot. He just happened to score the rushing touchdowns. Well, if he didn't score those rushing touchdowns, if it was a running back that did, or maybe, like I said, they had a defensive touchdown, he would have been awful last week. When they get up, they run the ball so much that he has to make up for it by being efficient early. And I mean, he's not going to be overly efficient. He doesn't have any quality pass catchers behind Brandon Cooks. So understand that. Understand you can go out there and get literally 6 points in a win. But that he's playing the Jets and he could still throw for 2 touchdowns, run for another one, have 50 rushing yards, and be a really good play. So it's a high variance play, not one that has a huge ceiling. But he's a quality streaming option this week. Probably spent more time in that game than we really need to. Titans at Patriots up next. This game is a 44-point total. Patriots are up to 7-point home favorites, which feels like a lot. Maybe an overreaction last week, but I mean, they are obviously the better team and playing at home. For the Titans, Adrian Peterson's gone, so we're left with Foreman, McNichols, and Hilliard. This is an awful spot, being a road underdog, projected to score like around 18 points. Even if McNichols cannot make it back, which I don't think he will, but even if he can't make it back from the concussion, Foreman and Hilliard are still very low-end options for me. You're praying that one of them falls into the end zone. That's more likely to be Foreman, but we know this split is just going to cap both their upside, right? Foreman's not going to get many targets. Hilliard's not going to get many carries. And again, it's a terrible spot for them. It is very unlikely that the Titans get up by multiple scores, that they're just pounding the rock with Foreman, and that he's doing well in that spot. The most likely outcome in this game is that, Brown is going to be the focal point of this offense, but is also going to be the focal point of Bill Belichick, right? He's going to take A.J. Brown completely out of the game, or at least try to. Same thing he did with Pitts last week. Look at that Falcons offense. They didn't have Cordero Patterson, which isn't even a player the Titans possess on the team. And so Bill looked at that and was like, okay, I'll just take Pitts out of the game, beat us with this absolute garbage you have behind him. And they weren't even able to score, right? The same thing's probably going to happen with the Titans. They're going to take A.J. Brown out of the game. They're going to force him to beat him with the scrubs that are behind him, and they're probably not going to be able to, and it's probably going to be very, very ugly for the Titans. So you don't have much confidence in anyone other than A.J. Brown, and you have muted confidence in Brown as well. I think you're still playing A.J. Brown. I don't see a case for benching him. He's still talented enough to beat any matchup, but mute expectations because he's probably not going to have a fantastic week. He's really the only one you can really consider here, though. For the Patriots, I have Stevenson and Harris with the exact same projection right now, both low-end twos. Assuming both are active, they'll just alternate drives, and we're going to have Bolden playing on third downs. It's just what's going to happen on offense. If Stevenson's out, it becomes much more interesting for Harris. I would probably consider him a must play if you have him. And Bolden would start being viable in 14, 16 team leagues, still not really in 12 team leagues. But assuming that Stevenson and Harris are good to go, which is what I think is going to happen, both low end twos, both good plays, but you can't really know who's going to score because they're literally just going to alternate drives. It'll be a Stevenson drive, then a Harris drive, and whenever it's third down, they're probably just bringing in Bolden. That's how they're going to operate. In the passing game, your only real options are Myers and Hunter Henry, but neither is all that appealing this week, to be honest. Hunter Henry, leads all tight ends in receiving touchdowns, so that's awesome, right? But if you look at his, reception counts since week 6, it's 2, 2, 1, 2, 4, and 2. So he's probably going to have 2 or 3 catches for 20 or 30 yards. So you're really banking on that touchdown, right? Or else he's going to score 4 or 5 points, even in full PPR leagues. So not a fantastic play, still a tight end too, even with all those touchdowns. And Myers hasn't really shown the ceiling yet. They've been moving the ball around to a bunch of different players, utilizing the ground game. And so honestly, Stevenson and Harris are the top plays from this game, and you shouldn't really branch out too much from that, or at least on that side, and honestly from the game in general. Eagles at Giants is up next. This game has a fairly average 45.5 point total, and the Eagles are 3.5 point road favorites. For the Eagles, the only must starts on their side are Jalen Hurts and Dallas Goedert, but I would say that Devonta Smith and Miles Sanders are both still very, very strong plays and are likely being started by the vast majority of people who own them. I think they are wide receiver and running back twos, respectively. Smith has been fantastic recently with, low passing volume being the only reason that he's failed over the past month. In most weeks, he's still been really good, even on the limited volume. Sanders is also the lead back on a run-first offense, and his main competition, being Jordan Howard, is likely out this week. So I think both Smith and Sanders, guys are starting, and I really don't see a case for benching Jalen Hurts, benching Dallas Goedert. They're both top 6, 7 options at their respective positions. And I wouldn't really go too far outside of the players I just mentioned. Those would be tertiary plays this week. I would stick to the guys I just mentioned. For the Giants, Saquon is the only must start, and honestly, the only player that I would use. You can make a case for Kadarius Toney. I love his talent. I love the upside if they feature him, but the Eagles are just a neutral matchup. It's not one that you're looking to attack, and the Giants spread the ball around so much that he doesn't see enough looks unless they're willing to scheme him a ton, and I'm not convinced they will this week, right? They have not shown recently that they're willing to scheme him 10 targets. and he needs that to happen, right? And if it's not going to happen, then he's probably not going to be that fantastic. Someone you can use in the flex, because the flex is kind of reserved for those types of plays that are maybe a little bit lower floor but have that ceiling. But I wouldn't use them at 2. And honestly, I think there are better plays in the flex because, again, they just have so many different targets that unless they're willing to just completely abandon some of them and only focus on Tony, he's just not going to see enough volume for me to want to start him. Steelers at Bengals up next. This game has a 44.5 point total, and the Bengals are 4-point home favorites. For the Steelers, Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, clear must starts. Freiermuth and Claypool are not must starts, but they're very quality options. I have Pat ranked 11th among tight ends. I have Claypool ranked 27th among wide receivers. That kind of means it comes down to what else do you have on your team. Do you have 3 top 20 wide receivers, in which case maybe you're not starting Claypool. I think the vast majority of people will be starting these guys, though, just not 100% of you, so I wanted to mention that. The Bengals have a stronger run defense than pass defense, and the Steelers are projected to be playing from behind, and so it's more likely we get into a fourth quarter where the Steelers have to throw the ball on the vast majority of their plays, and so that's just going to raise the floor and the ceiling of Pat and Claypool this week. They both also have very large red zone roles, and so I think that even in a game we're projecting the Steelers to lose, to not score like a ton of points, I still think the majority of people who have these two are playing them. And again, everyone is starting Najee Harris and Deontay Johnson. For the Bengals, Chase and Mixon are very clear must plays, while Burrow and Higgins are very, very strong plays, but by no means must starts. And I actually might drop the projection on Higgins a little bit because he's had a great target share. He's had good weeks, but he's been very inefficient. And I do think it's possible they start shifting a little bit of the workload that we're giving to him to Boyd, to Mixon, to Chase, to Uzoma, because it hasn't been working. He hasn't been overly efficient with his targets. He hasn't been that fantastic. I have him 24th right now, if that helps you, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the week I have him into like the lower 20s. And like if you just had Higgins versus Claypool, who would you rather play? I think my lean would be towards Claypool right now, even though like right now, I mean, the projections are off by like a decimal point, right? But I think like if I'm starting one of them in the flex, I just don't trust what Higgins has done recently. I don't trust how inefficient he's been, that he's going to get a ton of targets. And so I don't love the play. And then Burrow, that just depends on your quarterback situation. He's a fine streamer. Again, quarterback 10, that's pretty solid. But if you happen to have 2 quarterbacks, one of them is ranked inside the top 7, well, I guess you're not starting the quarterback 10. And again, you're obviously starting Mixon. You're obviously starting Jamar Chase. Tyler Boyd is fine because, like I said, maybe they start giving more of a workload to him. But personally, I can't go there unless it's a 14 or 16 team league. He's not a guy that gets a featured role in the red zone. He's not a guy that gets looks downfield. And so he needs a ton of targets to hit. And even last week when he had, 8 targets, he still didn't do all that great. So I don't love Boyd. I don't love Higgins this week. I think you're better sticking to the other players I talked about, and I don't love Uzoma either. Bucks at Colts up next. This game has an extremely high 53-point total, and the Bucks are 3-point road favorites for the Bucks. AB should miss this week. They're hoping to get him back in week 13, but whenever someone says hoping to get back, it does not mean it's a lock. But he's not going to be playing this week, which means that Godwin, Evans, and Gronk will join Brady and Fournette, all as must plays. The one here to watch is, of course, Evans. He's not a must play if he's out this week, but assuming Evans is healthy enough to play and it doesn't look like he's just going to be a decoy, all those guys are must starts. Again, 5 must starts on the Bucks this week. Leonard Fournette, Tom Brady, Gronk, Evans, and Godwin. All those guys should be in your starting lineup. We'll see what happens today. At least today for me, yesterday for you guys, with Mike Evans. If he doesn't practice, if he does practice, it's a 1 o'clock game, so it really doesn't matter. We're going to know ahead of time, and nothing changes if he's out. The same guys are must starts, and honestly, you're only playing Tyler Johnson in like a 14 or 16 team league, even if Mike Evans misses. With Gronk back, that kind of takes away the looks that would have shifted to Johnson, and so in a 10, a 12 team league, vast majority playing that. You don't need to go out and add Tyler Johnson. He's probably not going to get that high of a target share. He'd need to hit on 3-4 targets, which isn't what we want to be starting. For the Colts, you're really only looking at their big 3, Wentz, Pittman, Taylor. Obviously, start Taylor. So we talked about last week. It was like, this is a brutal matchup, right, against the Bills, but like you start him every week. It literally doesn't matter what the matchup is. Goes out there and scores a billion fantasy points. Same thing can happen this week. This is a brutal matchup against the Bucs. It does not matter. You're starting Jonathan Taylor every week. Wentz is a solid streaming option this week, since of course it is easier to pass on the Bucs. So obviously they're still going to pound the rock with Taylor, but they can still throw it, right? They still have a quality passing attack with him and Pittman, but it would only be Wentz and Pittman. I would not go to any other receivers because no one else really gets enough volume to be worth it. I think you're starting Pittman. I am his wide receiver 21 right now, so I guess a few of you might have better options. But I think he's still a good play. Like last week, they obviously ran the ball a ton and were in a very difficult passing matchup. This one, they're probably not going to have 5 touchdowns to Jonathan Taylor. They're probably not going to have a ton of like short fields where they can just run it in and just they have no opportunities to throw the ball. They're probably going to throw the ball more than last week. So I think Pittman's a good play. I think you're playing him. I think Wentz is a solid play. I just know that Wentz, we saw the floor last week, right? They can score like 40 points and he can have almost no fantasy points. So he's got a lower floor than a lot of other players that kind of put up similar numbers to him, but I think he's like a good streaming option, just one that, you don't have to go to, right? It's still not an easy matchup. I think that's one thing we talk about with the Bucs is like, it's a great matchup for wide receivers. It's not a great matchup for wide receivers because they still have a strong defense. It's just that you can't run on them, so you have to throw the ball. But they still have a good pass rush. They're still going to make it difficult for the passing attack, and so it's not just like everyone's going to smash going up against the Bucs. Just a little distinction there. Next up, we've got the Panthers at the Dolphins. This game has a very low 42-point total, and the Panthers are 2-point road favorites. For the Panthers, might be wild to hear, but your 2 must-starts from this game are obviously McCaffrey and Cam Newton. He's my quarterback 8 right now. I feel really good about playing him this week. He did really well in his return. He's got that rushing upside, clearly going to score rushing touchdowns, and the volume last week for the offense was really low, and he still did well. So if we expect the volume to increase this week because they're just naturally going to run more plays than they did last week, even in a matchup that isn't like cake, it's like a fine matchup, but it's not like the Dolphins still have a quality defense, right? They don't have a ton of standout players, but like their scheme is really good. They're just like well-coached team. They have an okay defense, right? They're not just going to steamroll the Dolphins, right? Still, I think if you have Cam Newton, you're playing him. McCaffrey, obviously, you're playing. DJ Moore is a really solid play as well. I don't want to call him a must play because I think he's like my wide receiver 20, something like that. But he's a clear alpha on this offense. Going to be used in the red zone. Going to be a consistent target. And again, last week the volume was lower. He still did pretty well. We're expecting the volume to increase this week. I think he's a good play. I wouldn't touch Robbie Anderson and obviously would not touch Terrace Marshall. For the Dolphins, and they don't even have like a tight end to use. For the Dolphins, I am not in love with anyone. Gaskin, Waddle, Gesicki, those are all like the top plays, but the Panthers have like a really, really good to elite defense. I don't really want to play any of them, especially if Lindsey ends up being active. I don't want to play Gaskin. Even if he's not active, like Gaskin's not a smash play. They have an awful offensive line. They're not going to get anything going on the ground, so you're relying on a ton of receptions. They're probably not going to score that many points. Waddle and Gesicki, again, are fine, but the Panthers, ranked 5th in pass defense DVOA, 1st in yards per attempt allowed, have given up the 5th fewest scheduled adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers, which is effectively what Gesicki is, a wide receiver at this point. So, honestly, I'm fine benching every single Dolphins player. But if you need to, you can play Waddle, you can play Gesicki. They're not great plays this week. We have another thriller up next. We've got Falcons at Jaguars. That'll be fun to watch. Can personally guarantee you I will not be watching this game. This one has a 46-point total, though, just because both these defenses are trash. And the Falcons are 2-point road favorites. For the Falcons, Kyle Pitts is a must-start. You're definitely playing him. Problem is, for the Falcons, it's the only player I'd use, right? Their ground game is awful, and it's a rotation. They have no talented wide receiver, and those two things kind of make Matt Ryan not a great play to me. Because Pitts needs like 200 receiving yards for Matt Ryan to have a good game. Early in the week, I thought maybe Ryan would be a good streaming option because the Jaguars' defense is so bad. Honestly, he's not streamer for me anymore. I'm going to probably take him off the website there. He's just not a great play. Who's he going to throw to? Right? Like you can say that he's dust at this point. Like he's not as good of a quarterback. But look at his receiver weapons. Olamide Zaccheaus, Russell Gage, Tajay Sharp. Come on. How are you going to throw to those guys, right? So it's Pitts and no one else for me. For the Jaguars, pretty similar story. The only must start is James Robinson. Dan Arnold is fine because, tight ends getting any sort of involvement are fine. Not a must play. Marvin Jones and LaVisca are also fine. But it comes out that, we're going to give, LaVisca more work. He's going to play from the slot more. He's going to get work in the ground game. It's like, okay, everyone knew you should have done that this off season. Why is that maybe happening at the first time in week 12? Right? I understand there's been injuries, but Agnew was not some god, right? You should have been involving these players earlier in the season. It's been absolutely embarrassing to watch this offense operate. They have talent. That's the unfortunate part, is that the Jaguars have talented players. They have a better offense players-wise than a lot of teams that are posting better numbers than them. It has been awful to watch. Hopefully, they can do something to close the season. LaVisca would be my preferred option, because if they are going to finally move him back into the slot, finally give him some carries, that just elevates the floor, which will also elevate the ceiling if you're getting these touches. But man, it is tough to trust anyone in the Jaguars besides James Robinson. 4 o'clock games. Going to kick off with Chargers at Broncos. This one has a little above average, 48-point total, and the Chargers are 2.5-point road favorites. For the Chargers, pretty much the same as every single week. Denver's a fairly neutral matchup. Of course, no one likes to play in Denver, but, they're not an elite defense like they used to be. Eckler, Herbert, Keenan Allen, all must starts. Get them in your lineups. Mike Williams is a quality start. I'm sure there are some of you out there that have better wide receivers and can play them over Mike Williams, but I would say that for the vast majority of people who have Mike Williams, you're playing him. He's got that great ceiling. Even if it's in the flex spot, you just want to be starting Mike Williams because he's someone that can go out there and get 102 scores and win you the week. For the Broncos, there are 0 must starts, but this is still a great matchup for Melvin Gordon, for Javonte Williams. The Chargers' run defense ranks last, literally 32nd in both rush defense DVOA and yards per carry allowed. Denver is most likely to find success on the ground and not through the air in this matchup, and they like doing that anyways, so it fits with what they wanted to do, right? They don't have to change their offense to fit the weakness of the defense. They can just run their offense as they usually do, and that's going to fit the weakness of the Chargers defense. So as long as those guys can get going, and if they can build any sort of lead, both these guys could be quality plays. So I think you can play both of them running back too. Of course, my preferred option is Javonte Williams. I think there's a chance coming out of the bye that they slightly shift a little bit more workload to him, but I'm still expecting roughly a 50-50 split, with just randomness coming down to if it's 45-55 and randomness coming down to who's on the field when they get into the red zone. But I think both of them, again, can be started. After that, it's really just Jeudy and Fant, both lower end plays. Fant, again, viable because he's a tight end that just gets targets, and there's not that many that do that. But Jeudy, fine, he has a talent to smash in any matchup. I don't think this is a spot where we're aggressively targeting him, but if you need to play him, I don't think you should feel awful about it. He's a quality player. He's going to be 100% now coming off this ankle injury. He's probably going to need a touchdown to pay off, both Fant and Jeudy, but I think still a quality play because he's still very talented. He's still their clear number one. Next up, we should have what should be a pretty solid game to watch between the Vikings and the 49ers. Hopefully it doesn't come into come out to be just a ground game, right? Just each team running the ball a ton. But it should be a fun game to watch because both teams are good. Both teams can have a really solid offense. And I would say neither team has an elite defense. This one has, did I even say the game? Vikings at the 49ers. That's what's up next. It's got a 49-point total. 49ers are 3.5-point home favorites. Again, should be a fun game to watch. For the Vikings, you're starting Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. Cousins is fine as a lone quarterback play, and Conklin is fine as a desperation play at tight end. Just understand that neither of them are high confidence plays, and you never really want to start secondary plays against the 49ers just because what have we seen the past 2 weeks, right? They can have 10, 11-minute drives, right? And when that happens, the other team's secondary players that were going to get, very few looks or have a very low floor, it's even lower, right? So if Conklin was going to see 5 targets, but now, they take 2 drives away, now maybe he only has 3 targets, and now that's not as great. So I wouldn't really play Conklin. Again, you're starting those studs, and Cousins, again, is fine, but definitely not a must start. For the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, must plays, get them in your lineup. Ayuk is a quality wide receiver 2, quality flex play. It's very interesting that his status comes down to Elijah Mitchell, which is so weird to think about. But if Mitchell plays, they can count on him on the ground game. They don't need to use Deebo Samuel as much as a running back. They still will because he's fantastic in that spot, but they don't need to as much, and so they can use him more in the passing game. But if Elijah Mitchell's out and they have to rely on Trey Sermon and Jeff Wilson, who aren't very good, then they have to use Deebo Samuel more in the ground game, which opens up more plays where Ayuk is getting featured in the passing game. So really weird concept, but yeah, the projection actually goes up for Brandon Ayuk if we remove Elijah Mitchell from the field. Because again, Jeff Wilson is not that good. Trey Sermon is not that good. You watch those games, they don't look fantastic. And so especially if the Vikings get up in this game and they just go, hey, our running backs stink right now, we're throwing the ball, there is a ceiling here for all of Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle. I want to see that game because I think that would be the game of the week if both these teams start airing it out. But that's kind of the commentary. And again, that should just kind of give you the ground game take as well. If Mitchell's in, you're playing him. If Mitchell's out, Wilson and Sermon are fine. Maybe like a low-end running back 2 for Wilson, but I don't think either of these guys are all that talented, and so I wouldn't be in love with playing either of them. Next up, we've got what is probably more likely to be the game of the week, and that's Rams at Packers. This game is a 47-point total. Rams are only 1.5-point road favorites coming off their bye. For the Rams, you're starting Kupp, you're starting Stafford, you're starting Henderson. I don't think you're playing anyone else, to be honest. Like Higbee's fine as a tight end too, but not that great. I imagine that you'd have better options in up to a 12-team league, but you can go there in 14 to 16-team leagues. Maybe Odell gets more work this week, but I want to see that happen for a week, then start him the next week. I'm not going out there and starting Odell this week. And the Packers, they have a really, really strong pass defense, especially to wide receivers, and so I stick to Kupp in the receiving game. Stafford, I think you're still playing him, but again, recognize he has a lower floor than usual because, again, like I said, the Packers have a really strong pass defense. And again, I think you're starting Henderson. Still his quality matchup. He gets plenty of looks. For the Packers, Adams, Dillon, Rodgers, absolutely must-starts in all formats. I'd likely stick to those three as well. The Rams have a strong overall defense, so you don't want to target secondary plays against them. You could use Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So much attention is drawn to Adams and trying to stop him or trying to slow him that MVS can get loose deep like we saw last week. But I'd still reserve that for 14, 16-team leagues. I don't think you need to go there in a 12-team league. Sunday night game is going to be Browns at Ravens. This game is a 47-point total, and the Ravens are 3.5-point home favorites. For the Browns, Nick Chubb is a must-start. I'd bench everyone else. Like Kareem Hunt is expected to return this week, but he's probably not going to get his typical workload, and it's not a good enough spot where you really want to be starting him. Since he's back, you can't really start Johnson. They don't have much talent at wide receiver. They don't give Landry enough looks for me to want to start him. They don't use their tight ends enough. It is really only Nick Chubb for the Browns. For the Ravens, you're starting Lamar Jackson. You're starting Mark Andrews. Marquise Brown is also a must start if he's active. I think if he's active, he's good enough to play. Obviously, if he's out, well, don't start him. If he is active, Bateman is fine in the flex. He's not a wide receiver too. He's fine in the flex. He can hit deep. He can score a touchdown. Bateman would just be a much stronger play if Marquise Brown is out. So you can play him again if Brown is in. He's going to be in that 33-37 range for wide receivers. But if Marquise Brown's out, I think Bateman becomes a really strong play. It didn't hit last week because Lamar was out. But if we can get a week without Brown where Bateman is the clear one with Lamar Jackson at quarterback, he's got a real ceiling. And I think you're definitely starting if that happens. Freeman's fine. I wouldn't start Latavius Murray. Freeman's fine because he could score a touchdown, get a few targets. But just fine. He's a fine low-end running back too. There's really not much else I can say about it. I'm not excited to start him, but I'm not just benching him regardless of what my team is, right? I just think he's fine. Monday night game, Seahawks at the football team. This game is a 47-point total, and the football team is actually a 1-point home favorite. A little bit surprising, but Seahawks have been awful recently. Despite being awful recently, you are absolutely starting Lockett. You are absolutely starting DK Metcalf. Football team ranks 30th in pass defense DVOA, 28th in yards per attempt allowed. They've surrendered the 4th most scheduled adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers. You're starting these two. I don't think Wilson's a must start, but he's my quarterback 11, so it likely means you're starting him. But hey, if you have, Cam Newton, I'd rather start Cam Newton this week. He's my quarterback 8. Joe Burrow, at least right now, he's my quarterback 10. Rather start him. Again, these numbers can change. Always just check the latest rankings, especially on Sunday morning, Saturday night. But right now, like, he's fine. He's a really good quarterback, but he's been playing awful. So I can't really move him up to where he used to be because he's been playing horribly. After those guys, like, I would avoid the ground game personally. It's a huge rotation. None of them are all that talented. This is a matchup where you prefer to pass the ball, not run it. And so honestly, I wouldn't start any of the running backs. For the football team, Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson are must starts. You might be surprised to hear that Gibson's a must start, but he's got 26 and 19 touches in back-to-back weeks. Seattle's allowed the second most scheduled adjusted fantasy points to opposing running backs. It's a really good matchup for running backs. They allow a lot in the receiving game, so maybe you could say this is more of a spot for McKissick, but it's only a spot for McKissick if the football team gets behind, right? If Seattle comes out and they hit 2 long touchdowns, well, now it's a McKissick game, right? And now McKissick might have 8 to 10 receptions. So that's why you can start McKissick, especially in a full PPR league. Just understand with him that if Vegas is right and the football team is like tied or a little bit winning in this game, it's more of a Gibson game. They're not going to bring McKissick in if they're up by a score. They're going to try and run the ball a bunch with Gibson. They're not going to be throwing as much to McKissick. So it's very game script dependent for both of these running backs, but I still think even if they got down, they're still going to use Gibson. He still has a good chance of scoring a touchdown. He should get a few targets. I don't think he's going to have a 0 target game like he did last week, and touches are there. They're still getting him 20, 25 touches a week right now. Looks healthier coming off the bye. I think you're playing Antonio Gibson. After that, no one. I mean, there's no receivers you're really looking at. Like, until Curtis Samuel can sometime get healthy, I'm not looking at the other wide receivers there. And then, like, I like Logan Thomas, but in his first week back, assuming he is good to go this week, in his first week back, I don't love it. And if he's not there, I'm not starting any backup tight end. I would stick to Terry McLaurin, Antonio Gibson, and then McKissick in a full PPR league or in a half PPR league if you really think Seattle comes out, establishes a lead, and then he has a ton of receptions. But understand that he's very, very game script dependent, has a very low floor. So that is my breakdown of every single remaining game this week. Remember, if you had 2 players that I talked about in a very similar fashion, you're like, oh, but I still don't know who to start from that. You can see my exact rankings along with my exact projections in every scoring format at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.